Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Welcome back. Tonight, 6 leading politicians who've just hot-footed it back onto the set, arguing whether we should remain in or leave the European Union, are with us tonight to try to convince you to vote with them on June the 23rd. So far, we've talked about immigration, the economy and the NHS, and our next question this evening comes from Maggie Smith, a writer who's keen to point out to us she's not the Dame Maggie Smith, but of a similar age. It's very lovely to have you with us, Maggie.
Thank you. I'm concerned about women's rights and employment rights in general, and I want to know where we're better protected, inside or outside.
Maggie, thank you very much. And I'll turn first to Gisela Stewart.
Yesterday in the House of Commons, we actually saw a piece of art, New Dawn, which celebrated 150 years of the first petition in Parliament for the suffragettes and the suffragists. Women's rights over the decades have been more protected and have been more progressive in the United Kingdom. It's been strong trade unions and strong Labour governments which have produced that. If you look at any of the rights which we have, either started here or actually better here, it is nonsense to think that the European Union protects us from ourselves. I want strong trade unions and a strong Labour government, and then women will continue to be better off here.
Gisela Stewart, thank you. Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, I am very concerned about women's rights and employment rights, and frankly, I am very worried about what happens if we're out of the European Union and we have a Tory government with unfettered control of these things, because the European Union, in the very treaties, guaranteed the right to equal pay for women. It guarantees maternity and paternity rights. It guarantees paid holidays. You can't be forced to work more than a set number of hours. It protects pensions. I think these are gains of European Union membership that it's really worth holding on to. Let's not put these in the hands of people who, in their own words, say that they are one of the problems of European Union membership. Let's protect them.
Thank you, Nicola Sturgeon. Andrew Leadsom.
Well, as a mother and with a daughter of my own, it's something that really deeply concerns me. And what I can tell you, actually, is contrary to what Nicola says. In fact, the UK Equal Pay Act of 1970 was before we entered the EEC. The UK Sex Discrimination Act was in 1975, before the first EU directive on the subject. Of course, in the last Parliament, we introduced shared parental leave. This Parliament, we're introducing tax-free childcare. We were the first, far before the EU, to introduce, to make female genital mutilation illegal. We have a proud history of looking after women's rights.
Andrew Leadsom, thank you. Andrew Eagle.
Well, I've fought all my political life for rights for women, and it was Barbara Castle, a great heroine of mine, that introduced a lot of that legislation. But, you know, when we went into the European Union, the last Labour government actually negotiated some of these rights into the treaties, so they can't be taken away by people like Boris, who might want to take them away if ever he got into number 10. So what you do is you have an underpinning, a floor of rights below which it never falls, and that means that you can guarantee further progress rather than having a race to the bottom where people's rights are being taken away.
Andrew Eagle, thank you. Boris Johnson.
Of course, Barbara Castle campaigned fervently against joining the EU, even back in 1975, and I think she would be appalled to see what it has turned into. We were told it was going to be a common market. It's now evolving into a United States of Europe, and I think women, everybody, have got to be alarmed by the way the EU is developing. And one thing that particularly concerns me and my family is the idea that on the streets of our city, on the streets of London, because of the European judges, there are terrorists and murderers and very serious criminals that we cannot deport, because the European Court is taking control over that kind of question, and I think we should take that control back.
Thank you. Amber Rudd.
proud of the United Kingdom's role in promoting women's rights, and I think it's incredibly important. But actually, this is a really good example of how our country has influenced other countries in making sure that they too have those rights. There's a lot of talk about take back control. Well, I just don't want control in little England over here. What I want is the sort of control where we influence other people with our values as well. And it's us. We have been leading on extending those rights for women within the European Union. And there are English women working and Scottish women working all over, and Welsh women, thank you, working all over, I'm going to finish my point, working all over the European Union who should be protected by those rights. And because of our influence, they are.
OK, and just... now we've taken in the whole of the United Kingdom with that closing comment. Let's just remind ourselves before we crack on of the question from Maggie. It wasn't specifically about women's rights. She said, I'm concerned about women's and employment rights broadly, and she wanted to know where we are better protected inside or outside the EU. To open the debate, Gisela Stewart.
Employment rights require jobs. These rights are meaningless unless the economy is performing properly. The European Union is a zone of the Eurozone which is producing massive youth unemployment. It's economic growth. It's the only continent other than Antarctica which has had lower growth. But in terms of your employment rights, what I find so extraordinary is the kind of lack of confidence that this country isn't strong enough to make sure that we continue those rights which we brought. Even when a Labour government introduced the minimum wage, even the Tories, not only could they not abolish it because the British people wouldn't vote them in if they hadn't been careful of this, it made it a living wage. We are strong, we're protecting the rights, and workers' rights are meaningless unless you've got a job.
It's the confidence to stand up for those rights within the United Kingdom is the point that Gisela Stewart is making.
I happen to think that people are more likely to have a job if we have a thriving economy. We're more likely to have that in the European Union, and that is why all the major trade unions, representing 4 million workers in this country, are actively campaigning for us to remain in the European Union. And, you know, there is a threat to workers' rights from people who are working on the Leave campaign. Priti Patel, the employment minister in the current government, made a speech where she said the EU employment regulation was unnecessary and meddlesome and should be cut in half. Is she talking about paid holiday? Is she talking about maternity or paternity leave, protection for agency workers? And they need to come clean in the Leave campaign. Which rights would they take away?
Boris Johnson. Absolutely none.
Sorry, for clarification, you said absolutely none.
I want to know whether that counts as being miserable or negative or fear-based in your approach.
Let me answer that directly, Boris.
We've said very clearly that we want to protect the rights of people in the workplace. Indeed, people bash up the Conservative Party. Actually, it was William Johnson Hicks who gave women the right to vote in this country. I think that Labour has still to produce a woman leader of the party, though maybe Angela Eagle will sort that out at some stage.
Boris, beware of the blonde bombshell.
Our courts, our parliament uphold the rights of women at work, the rights of everybody at work. We have pioneered these things in this country. We should be incredibly proud of it. We do not need the European Union to guarantee our humanity.
On that specific point, Nicola Sturgeon.
The thing is, to answer Gisela directly, I don't have confidence that politicians like Boris Johnson would keep these protections. Why do I not have confidence? Because this is what Boris said. The weight of employment regulation is now back-breaking. We should get rid of the Collective Redundancies Directive, the Workers' Directive, the Working Time Directive, and 1,000 more. That's what Boris Johnson wants to do if he manages to get us out of the European Union and have unfettered control of these things. I don't want that.
For clarification, just briefly, would you like to answer that? And I'll come to Andrew
I would like to be absolutely clear.
That's what you said.
Our side is determined to protect the rights of workers, and I think it's absolutely absurd.
Well, you're not telling the truth then.
Absolutely absurd.
So why did you
you are seeking,
Boris, this isn't important. You're asking
spread
people.
Scare stories about what would happen outside.
I'm quoting
Mr. Johnson, thank you.
These are
Everybody,
protected by our
Mr.
courts
Johnson,
and our
please allow Nicola Sturgeon to just put that point again and respond.
Boris Johnson is asking people to trust his word. He's making a lot of claims and he's asking you to trust him and vote the way he wants you to vote in 2 weeks' time. Now, I'm simply asking him if he's telling the truth tonight about the protection of workers' rights? Was he not telling the truth when he said he wanted to get rid of all of the ones I've just listed? You think the thing is, Boris Johnson is not interested in your job or your protection. He's only interested in David Cameron's job.
Thank you.
I think it's very important that people recognise that under our proposals, everything we've said, and I know that Gisela agrees with this very strongly, we do not want to see any attrition of the rights of people at work. That is not what we're campaigning for. We're campaigning to take back control of our economy and our legislative system. And I'd like to challenge the Remain campaign to say whether they agree with absolutely every jot and tittle of EU law. Do they accept every one of the 2,000 regulations that comes from Brussels every year? Do they think it a good thing that our business is weighed down with regulation that costs £600 million?
OK, thank you. You've made that point. I'll go to Amber Rudd and then...
I think you need to... I think the question needs to make her judgment based partially on the company that the Vote Leave keep. When we talk about Nigel Farage, do you think he's going to be a champion for women's rights? Was it him or was it another one who said women should wash behind the back of their fridge? And there's a publication called Economists for Brexit, and in it they call for specific deregulation of climate change, of banking, and yes, of gender issues, gender equality for women. Now, that may not be what Boris is saying about himself, but that is the company, that is the campaign that calls for deregulation. Okay. Absolutely, we're better off in.
Andrea Leadsom.
This really is the lowest of the low. I mean, we're trying to give viewers some sensible information here. And actually, do you know what we're hearing from the Remain side is, and particularly from Nicola Sturgeon, that in fact we should stay in the European Union because as this country elected a Conservative government, we need to stay in the European Union so that it can overrule a democratically elected government and then do what she wants it to do. That is absolutely outrageous.
Why did Priti Patel make that speech saying she wanted to save so much money 2 weeks ago?
Let me put. Sorry, Gisela, just a second.
These are your words.
Let me put the question back another way. What we've heard from the Remain campaign is that they believe in every piece of EU regulation. Well, tell me what you would get rid of.
I do.
Why did you say what you would get rid of?
I do believe in the redundancies directive.
OK, hang on. Let's just call a halt there. We asked Boris Johnson to respond very directly to the question put by Nicola Sturgeon. Boris Johnson's put a question very directly to this side. Perhaps I can point that back to Angela Eagle, Shadow Business Secretary.
I've sat on the Council of Ministers and I've been part of making good deals for Britain on the Council of Ministers by compromise. I was there when we got the European arrest warrant signed, sealed and delivered, and that meant the 7-7 bomber who fled to Italy was brought back to this country within days to face the justice he deserved.
What regulation,
we
Angela?
would not have those kind of arrangements if we didn't work with our European partners to make our fight against cross-border crime and terrorism more effective.
Can we make sure we stick to the question on employment?
There's no reason why the European arrest warrant should not be done at an intergovernmental level.
OK, well, let's park that there, because I need to come back.
And they still haven't told us which regulations they've repealed.
Thank you. The question was about employment and women's rights specifically. Amber Rudd.
Yes, I think they are absolutely better off in the European Union. And I would say, look at the company that's kept. Individuals here are picking off beats of their campaign, and it is a campaign that they don't like. But that campaign makes a very strong signal about deregulation of certain rights, and one of them is women's and employment rights.
Gisela Stewart.
This is about the future, and it's about taking control of the decision-making of the future. There was a time in the 1980s when there was a very socialist-minded commission. Because what the Commission and the European Union can take, it can also take away. We've now got a Commission that is two-thirds right-wing and centre-right governments, two-thirds right-wing and centre-right commissioners, two-thirds right-wing and centre-right MEPs. What tells you that they will be the continuous guardians of women's rights. I want jobs here, I want women's rights, and I want to make sure that we take control and have them decided here.
Very briefly, Andrew Leadsom, and I'll turn to this side.
Gisela is exactly right. The point is it's not up to them. You know, we now have 5 presidents of the EU. Can anyone name them? Can anyone even name what jobs they do?
They're all men.
They're all men, exactly right. We can't get rid of them. We didn't vote for them. We've got no chance against them, so we're entirely in their hands.
Thank you. Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, I'm just laughing at hearing the Leave side decry the lack of democracy. In this country right now, every single law that comes out of Westminster is influenced by 900 unelected people in the House of Lords. It's absolutely laughable to hear them lecture us about democracy. But the fact of the matter is, these are really important protections, not just for us, but for people across the European Union. Why is it important that they go right across the EU? So that big multinational companies or right-wing politicians can't force a race to the bottom. It's about protecting workers, whether we're working here or British workers or Scottish workers working in other parts of the European Union. They're vital protections and we should not put them in the hands of Boris Johnson and co.
Thank you very much for all of that. So we're going to draw a line there for that part, and it actually neatly leads us on to the next subject matter. And thank you very much indeed, Maggie, for your question to all of our contributors this evening. We're going to move on now to that issue of sovereignty, just raised in the last few seconds. And Len Chappell, a childcare worker from Swindon, has the next question.
As a former member of the armed forces, I and other veterans have served this country. I know what sovereignty means to me, but I want to know what it means to you.
Len, thank you very much indeed. And I'll turn first to Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, I don't know that there's any bigger supporter of countries being independent on this panel than I am. I've spent all of my adult life campaigning for Scotland to be independent. I believe countries should be independent. The UK right now is independent, just as France and Germany and Sweden and Denmark and Ireland are all independent. But I also passionately believe that in the modern, globalised, interdependent world we live in today, independent countries have to work together for the benefit of all of us, because there are some big issues that no single country can tackle alone. Protection of workers' rights, climate change, global security. We need to work together as independent countries. That's what I stand for.
Nicola Sturgeon, thank you. Andrew Leadsom.
What sovereignty means to me is it's inextricably tied up with democracy, and ultimately what it is that you, the people, are in charge. And if you don't like the government of the day, you need to be able to sack us. That's what gives us our sovereignty, is because you are in charge, and if we mess up, you get rid of us. Now, the problem with being in the European Union is that can't happen. 60% of our rules and regulations are made by people we don't even know their names, let alone their job titles. None of them are British, and we can't get rid of them. And regardless of which government you choose, they continue in that same mould. You cannot get rid of them. We need to take back control.
Angela Eagle.
Well, look, the House of Commons says only 13% of our rules are actually come from the European Union. But I think sovereignty means to me having confidence in our ability to project our values in an international world. And we need to work with others where it's in our national interest to do so, and pool sovereignty in certain areas, because we can achieve more working with each other than we ever could do alone. That's part of the Labour Party's Clause 4. It's what we agree with as a political party. It's part of our political credo. And I think we need to be confident enough to know that we can work in NATO, in the UN, that we can work in the European Union and make our influence count.
We'll turn to Labour's Gisela Stewart.
I want to thank the armed forces and the veterans for what they've done for this country. They have defended democracy. And that is a question on the 23rd of June. Do you defend democracy? Do you take the right to control? Because to me, the essence is that you, the people, can get rid of us, the people who make the rules on your behalf. And there are checks and balances, our courts, there are all those kind of systems there. But in the current structure of the European Union, particularly now that you've got a single currency, a whole lot of decisions are currently made and will have to continue to be made without that accountability. So sovereignty for me is to take control, and you can remove us.
Gisela Stewart, thank you. Andrew Wade.
Sovereignty is being in control of our destiny. But a man on an island on his own is sovereign. Now, I experienced as Cabinet Minister going to Paris at the end of last year, where I saw Nicola, in order to address a really dangerous international problem of climate change. And we got an international deal to deal with it. And we got it while the UK was leading the EU negotiations. We were able to get an international deal that was in our interest, in families at home's interest, because we were at the European Union setting the terms of that deal. Being sovereign means having influence outside of the United Kingdom. That's what we get by being in the European Union.
Amber Rudd, thank you. And Boris Johnson.
And we can have exactly that influence and more if we take back control and come out of the EU. Because what happens within the EU is that we are more outvoted than any other country. We have 60% of our laws now coming from Brussels. Chuka Umunna himself has confirmed that, your friend Angela. And our sovereignty, for me, belongs to the people. It's their ability to kick out at elections the people who take the decisions. Let me tell you, there's nowhere else in the world that is engaged in this kind of experiment of fusing countries together to create a super-state, a United States of Europe. It is anti-democratic.
Let's... Thank you very much for your opening statements. Amber Rudd.
I just think you need to level with people, Boris, and be frank about the fact that we do have influence in the world by being part of a stronger grouping. That was my direct experience. And we are only, in climate change, say, 1% of the world's emissions. And there were 3 blocs negotiating, the EU, China and the US. And if we had just been on our own, we wouldn't have been able to have that influence.
Let me give you a classic example of how the EU lets us down, and lets down consumers and people who are victims of pollution, and indeed people who oppose climate change. When you look at what happened with the VW scandal, that was a complete masterclass in the collusion between Brussels bureaucrats, the well-paid lobbyists, and the motor manufacturing industry to conceal what was really going on. Millions of people bought diesel engines, bought diesel cars on false pretenses, and our ability to improve our air quality in our cities was sharply reduced. And that was a disaster caused by the absence of democracy and the lack of control. We take back control, we're better able to deal with those problems.
I don't accept that that's the case. What I do say is that when you mention climate change, and pollution is the same, we don't want to do this on our own. We have to have the influence and the reach of doing it internationally, because it's an international problem.
So I would just say, as Amber will agree, the UK Climate Change Act of 2008 is what set our climate change ambition. It was a UK act, it's got nothing to do with the EU, and it will endure. But can I just also suggest that one of the key areas that we are losing control of is in taxes. VAT on fuel bills. We are unable to get rid of VAT on fuel bills because the EU prevents us from doing so, in spite of fuel poverty. Not only that, but the EU is also looking at introducing, some of them, a financial transactions tax that, even though we vetoed that, theoretically, will still cost our pension funds £4 billion if it gets implemented in the EU.
Shadow Business Secretary Angela.
And you get in there and you negotiate. If we came out of the EU, our pension funds would still want to invest in the EU. It's a very large market for them. I'll tell you, I think in a globalised world, we're better able to stand up for ourselves when we're part of multinational bodies, and we ought to be confident enough to know that we can get our way when we engage properly, and there are advantages to us doing that. Are we going to turn our backs on our nearest neighbours? Are we going to turn our backs on the rest of the world and somehow hope we can have a position in the world like we had 42 years ago before we joined the European Union?
Let's put that point to Giza Stewart.
Of course, we're still going to be in all the international bodies. We'll be part of the United Nations, the World Trade Organizations, the UN Security Council, all these things. But what we will not be part of is a sclerotic creature that had a noble idea in the 1950s that demands supremacy of its laws. And what we've seen over the last 20 years, the waves of globalization, whether it's services, people or goods, this institution has not been able to deal with it, and the environment, actually, it doesn't need to be dealt with in one of the blocks. It is in the units of sovereign accountability, and then the whole world.
OK.
The EU just gets in the way.
Nicola Sturgeon.
I just wonder what kind of dreadful message it will send to the world for the UK to decide to turn its back on Europe and the world, to look in on itself and cut ourselves off. Yes, we've got our own climate change legislation. Scotland's got the most ambitious climate change targets in the world. But we won't meet our climate change ambitions unless all countries work together. And working together is not about giving up independence.
Yes.
Imagine if you went to France or Germany or Ireland or Denmark or Sweden or any other country in the European Union and said, you're not independent countries. They would laugh at you for that. Independence and interdependence are two sides of the same coin in the modern world. We should not turn our backs on the world.
I think it's curious to hear this from Nicola, because she's obviously keener to be ruled by Brussels than she is by Westminster politicians. But for me, the most important point is that actually we do increase our influence if we come out, because very often what's happening is that the European Union is trying to replace the UK in conversations, for instance, in the IMF or many other, the UN, international bodies. Take the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, where Britain used to have a powerful voice. The EU now wants to speak for us, and when the EU can't decide its position, there is no UK position. That is a disaster for people who care about endangered animals in this country.
Can I put, leaving the endangered animals special though they are, I'd just like to point the point that you made. I'm not disagreeing on that basis at all. I'd just like to take the point that you made to Nicola Sturgeon about rules from Brussels and ask you to respond.
Look, I don't think I'm betraying any secrets here when I say I want Scotland to be an independent country. But if Scotland becomes an independent country, I'd want Scotland to be an independent country in the European Union and in the single market, because as an independent country, I'd want us to work with other independent countries for the greater good. That's how the modern world works, and turning away from that is not the answer to the problems that Boris Johnson would seem to want us to believe it is. Working with other countries. You know, I was at Glasgow University last Friday talking to some of our students who'd done part of their degree in other European countries, to European students who were here studying. That mix of cultures, that diversity, that learning from each other is one of the reasons why the European Union has helped guarantee the longest period of peace on the continent in modern times.
I would just like to say that it is quite extraordinary that Nicola, quite rightly, achieved a once-in-a-generation referendum for the Scots only 2 years ago. Now, when we have a referendum in this great United Kingdom of ours, we listen to what the people tell us, and then we go away and we fulfil their instructions. And when we vote leave on June the 23rd, I have no doubt that the entire government will get behind the negotiation and make it a success. But isn't it interesting that Nicola, in spite of the people of Scotland saying 55 to 45, they want to remain in the United Kingdom, she is determined to have another go because it was the wrong answer. Isn't that what the EU tries to do when people give them the wrong answer?
Thank you.
She's not a Democrat.
Just respond to that very briefly, and I'm going to bring in Amber.
Yeah, I don't think, as I say, it's any secret what I stand for in terms of independence, but I'm putting that to one side tonight. I'm standing here because I want the people across the UK to vote to stay in the EU, because I think that's better for Scotland, and I think it's better for the whole UK. That's the argument I'm making, not just to this audience, but to people across the country.
And just on a point of information, if the UK votes to leave, would there be another
Look, I'm not here tonight speculating about what happens in the event of a Brexit vote. I'm here tonight arguing the case for Remain.
Thank you.
Because it's in the best interest of people across the UK.
This does raise an important point, which is the union. And the fact is that we are a great and proud country, Great Britain. And the fact is, just listening to this, we know that if we vote to leave, there will be an issue with the union. We've had two former Prime Ministers in Ireland today pointing out the issue there, where once more, vote leave have no plan for what the border would look like. We don't know. There is danger to the union as well from this proposal to leave.
There is a successful union, and it's the United Kingdom. It has adapted and it has changed, and it has always responded to the demands of the people. There's an unsuccessful union, and it's called the European Union. It has a single currency, which reduces unemployment, and that's why I think I stick with a successful union, and for that reason, I say vote leave.
Let's bring in Angela Eagle, and perhaps we can just go back to the original question from Len. He said, I know what sovereignty means to me, I want to know what it means to you.
Well, I think we are a proud, sovereign nation who've made a decision to pool a small amount of our sovereignty so that we can have a bigger influence in the continent, which are our near neighbours. And I think we should be confident enough in our own democratic values, in our own ways of negotiating, to know that we get our way in those circumstances more often than we don't. They are so pessimistic about our ability in this country. And I'm fed up of listening to Vote Leave telling us we're not in control of anything. We are.
I just find that extraordinary. This isn't a pooling of sovereignty. This is a takeover by an unelected European superstate. It's absolute nonsense to say it's a pooling of sovereignty. We cannot control our borders. We cannot control our taxes. We cannot control the rules and regulations. And yet the European Union is failing to negotiate trade. It's a disaster, and it's getting worse. We have to take back control and get back in charge of our own economy.
We need to stop misleading people on the role that we play in the European Union. We win those votes. I presume you're talking about the Council of Ministers votes. 95% of the times. We get our way. We are a strong country. We are one of the top influencers for the outcomes within the European Union. We are not a passenger in this. We are a leader in this. Don't let them con you that it's anyone else.
I only wish that were true. I only wish that were true. We are outvoted more than any other country, 72 times in the last 20 years. And we are unable to stop further transfers of sovereignty, which is what the gentleman asked about. Further control is going to be passed to Brussels by the 5 presidents' report as they try to bubblegum the euro together. We are going to be asked to pay for it. It's been perfectly clear from what the government has done with our budgetary payments that those are going to continue. Another 2.4 billion they're going to ask for as soon as this referendum is over. And we have absolutely no way of stopping it.
Thank you. We'll just conclude the question there on sovereignty, and thanks to Len for that question. Thank you, all of you, very much indeed on that issue. Time now for our final question, which comes from charity worker Sabrina Varshist.
Hi, thank you. The whole debate around about EU membership seems to have descended into a match of who can shout the loudest and more often who can provide the punchiest soundbite, and I think we've seen that plenty here today. Given the constant accusations of scaremongering, how can the public really trust what any of you are saying?
Sabrina, thank you very much indeed. So, the final question, Boris Johnson.
Well, I think that we are dealing on our side in hard, cold, observable, empirical fact about what is taking place in the EU now. It is the zone of worst growth anywhere in the world apart from Antarctica. It is abominable that you have 51% youth unemployment in Greece. We're paying huge sums of money into it, which are set to grow. The only solution they have for the problems of the Eurozone is to try to create, as I say, a United States of Europe with further transfers of power away from this country to the European Union. That is the plan, in black and white, in the 5 presidents' report. I think it had its purpose once. It's not an ignoble idea.
Thank you, that's time.
In the 1950s, it's time to come out.
Nicola Sturgeon.
I would just say use your common sense. You know, you're the best experts when it comes to this decision. So ask yourself the questions. Is it better for jobs in the economy if we're trading in a market of 500 million people rather than 65 million people? Is it going to make us more able to tackle big global issues like climate change and security if we work together rather than working on our own? Will we be better able to protect workers' rights, not just here, but right across the continent if we pool sovereignty to work together? So apply your own common sense. I'm the last person that's going to defend scaremongering. I was on the receiving end of it for 2 years in the independence campaign. Use your common sense, and your common sense will tell you to vote Remain.
Nicola Sturgeon, thank you. Andrew Leadsom.
Well, I agree with Boris. We need to look at the facts here. The UK is the world's 5th biggest economy. We speak the world's international business language. We have the world's best contract law. We are part of a commonwealth of 2.3 billion consumers, most of whose economies are growing faster than any economy in the EU. Our trade exports to the EU have flatlined over 10 years and gone down dramatically over the last few. We have enormous strengths in the world, both in soft power and in hard trading power. The future, when we take back control and vote to leave, is very bright indeed.
Angela Leadsom, thank you. Angela Eagle.
Well, I think, Sabrina, it's an important decision for you to make, and you've got to listen to the arguments and see what you think. But I think that this is a decision about jobs, it's a decision about rights at work, whether we're willing to work together and confident enough to know that we can get our way in the world. And that's why I've been deeply concerned about some of the myths that we've heard from the Leave camp, the £350 million a week blooper that's on the bus driving round everywhere that still they won't say is a lie. And it's not Project Fear, I think, to ask for some straightforward answers from the Leave campaign about what leaving would look like.
Lisa Stewart.
I think there's very few facts about the future. But on the 23rd of June, there is an undeniable truth, and that is that the status quo actually is not on the ballot paper. There are risks in remaining, and there are opportunities in voting to leave. Because what has happened is that the European Union has grown beyond its original construct. There are 28 countries now, there are 5 more coming in, including Turkey. Our weight in voting is continuing to decline, and therefore, I think if you want to be stronger, if you want to be safer, then you take control and you vote leave.
Lisa Stewart, thank you. Amber.
Be careful of the lies that we hear from Vote Leave when we know that Turkey isn't coming into the European Union. Be careful of the misinformation you're going to get from there. But ultimately, it is about common sense. And when you think about the European Union, think about whether it actually is going to make us stronger, safer and better off by being in it. Because if you unpick it, what you've got there is a free market, no tariffs, no costs to be able to people buy and sell in there, which naturally means you can keep those costs down. And if you can keep those costs down, that means lower prices for families, more jobs for people, and more money to put into our public services.
Thank you very much indeed. Let's go straight to Lisa Stewart. And just a reminder that Sabrina's question was very much about the nature of this debate across all parties, across all participants. She was asking very specifically about the nature of the debate that we've seen.
Well, that's why I'm saying I'm trying to focus on the things which we know are going to happen. And the thing which has changed is that there are some countries in the European Union which have got a single currency. They have to integrate more deeply. The 5 Presidents' reports tells us that. The very things which we rejected since Maastricht, which is the single currency plus the free travel in the area. So we have to use examples to show of what the future would look like. And it's a risk to stay in.
We're not in the European Union. We're not in the Schengen. We're not in the Eurozone. We're not in the Schengen. We're not in the Eurozone. We are not in the Eurozone, and it shouldn't be used to scaremonger about what will happen to this country. We are not in the Schengen area. We can have the best of both worlds. We control our own borders, and we still have influence on the way that the European Union writes its rules, because we have to abide by those rules if 50% of our trade, which we do with the European Union, is going to grow.
Angela Leadsom.
That is just such utter nonsense. You know, we do not control the amount of money that the European Union requires from us. We know they're massively overspent because of the Euro crisis, youth unemployment, their migration crisis, these things that we're supposedly not a part of, we will end up paying for. But let's just look, you know, we say we're not affected by any of this. Ronald Noble, former head of Interpol, says that the supposedly migration situation in Europe is like hanging out a sign welcoming terrorists to Europe. We haven't covered that yet. We in the UK are not even in control of our borders.
Okay.
We cannot ask people if they have a criminal record.
Two big shakes of the head here from Amber Rudd and Nicola Sturgeon.
This is what I call scaremongering, when people talk about immigration in that tone, and it's completely unacceptable. There are bailouts that we get exemption from. There are vetoes that the Prime Minister has secured. We have a separate, different arrangement within the European Union to other people, which gives us the best of both
Nicola
worlds.
Sturgeon.
Well, I think we've just heard there 3 things that are just not true. I mean, we have no control over criminals coming in. People are checked at the borders against security and terrorist lists. There are European nationals that are turned away from the border if they're thought to be a threat. That's the first thing. Secondly, this 5 Presidents' report is about integration for Eurozone countries. It doesn't apply to the UK because we ain't in the Eurozone. And then, thirdly, Turkey. For goodness sake, every single European Union country has a veto over Turkey entering. And that's assuming Turkey meets the criteria, which they're a million miles away from doing. These are scaremongering arguments, and you shouldn't listen to them.
I'm afraid that's a simple error of fact. And the reality is, if you look at what the government has had to do just over the last few months, whenever Brussels asks for more money, even though we think that we're not required to pay, for instance, for the bailout funds, the stabilisation fund, we had to cough up. They asked for 1.7 billion. We ended up giving 1 billion. They asked for another £1 billion contribution because they revalued the UK economy and said our GNI, our gross national income, was higher than they thought. So the better we do, the more we have to pay into Brussels. The Prime Minister said he wasn't going to pay. He paid on the nail. And the same goes, I'm afraid, for what is going to come down the track with the Eurozone. We have no protection at all as part of the EU from paying into this, nor do we have any protection, Nicola, from the plans to go ahead under the 5 Presidents' report with harmonisation of company law, of property rights, of employment law, and so on. And they will take us further and further into the United States of Europe.
This is complete scaremongering. Boris, I have to call you out again for misleading the public. The Prime Minister got a particular exemption from us being left out if there were difficulties for those of us outside the Eurozone. We have vetoes. We can use them. Don't undermine this country's position.
Gisela Stewart.
In 2002, I negotiated a European constitution. I was Parliament's representative. I spent 15 months in Brussels negotiating. I've sat around the table in the Council of Ministers making decisions. I used to teach European law. The one thing which has taught me over the last 20 years, that time and time again, you're being told, this is not going to happen. This is just a silly idea. And then, further down the road, it has happened. What is happening with the Eurozone? Let's just be clear. Currently, 28 countries, only 2 have an opt-out. It's 26 against 2. Any new country, and that would include an independent Scotland, and be very interesting to see whether you will join the euro, would have to join the euro. Simple arithmetic tells me that you lose control if it's 2 versus 31.
OK, let me put this to the other side. Angela Ebel.
Look, I think that you shouldn't scare about the decisions that are going to have to be made by Eurozone countries to integrate because they've got a single currency. We do not have a single currency. They have their own group to decide how they are going to deal with that, and that is up to them. It doesn't affect us, but we still have access to the single market. We have access... we're not in Schengen, but we are in control of our own borders, but that allows us to ensure that the Dublin arrangements work and refugees have to go back to the country where they first came in to register. These are all positives that we get from engaging with Europe that you would throw away because you're scaremongering about what's going on in the Eurozone.
And I think, actually, there are 2 ways in which we are very heavily impacted by what's going on in the Eurozone. Number one, I'm afraid it is true that we will be sucked into those further arrangements to keep the euro together, and we will have to be involved in the bailouts. And number 2, I'm afraid that the disaster in the Eurozone area is producing very considerable migratory flows on a scale that we haven't seen for a very long time. And that is, as long as we are part of the EU, we cannot escape from the consequences of that. If we come out and we take back control, there's one thing I do agree very strongly both with Amber and with Nicola, is that there is a tariff-free zone all the way from Iceland to Russia. We're part of that. We would continue to be part of that, and we would prosper.
Nicola Sturgeon.
I just, you know, Boris keeps saying that, but it's not true. You take countries like Norway or Switzerland who are outside the EU, but in this single market free tariff zone, they pay into the European Union. They have to abide by all of the rules. You know, I simply say the question was about scaremongering. We've got a mixture from Boris and the Leave campaign of scares and downright untruths in this campaign. Trust yourself. Trust your common sense. We're in the modern world today. Surely it's better as independent countries, and I hope Scotland will be one of them in the not-too-distant future, but as independent countries working together for the good of all of us. That's what the European Union is about.
Can we come back to the issue of tax? Because I'd be very interested to hear what the Remain side have to say about the EU's plans to give all of us, as citizens of the United Kingdom, a European tax number. I'd also like to know what the Remain side have to say about the fact that the EU is refusing to allow us to fine multinational companies who've refused to pay their taxes and are in fact making us pay them back around £7 billion over the next few years of taxes they failed to pay in the United Kingdom.
Let's go to the Shadow Business Secretary, Angela.
Look, I think that what you need to see is that with a single market of the size that the European Union gives us, we can actually have a good effect on global multinational companies. For example, Google has got an Apple, and these big companies have to deal with a body the size of the European Union if they want to sell into it, and that actually gives you more power.
Money back.
That actually gives you more power to make sure that you get your taxes right. I wouldn't...
It's the opposite. They get,
the opposite.
They get huge tax breaks to go to Luxembourg.
All right. Thank you. Angela, you just finish quickly.
I mean, the Luxembourg issue is about a national issue of tax, where Luxembourg is competing with Ireland to have low taxes. If you have a race, if you have a race to the bottom, that's what happens.
Thank you very much. And there, on that question, we must leave it. Thank you all for your contributions on that. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very much. We're approaching now the end of our debate, and I'd like to invite each of tonight's contributors to make a final brief statement on which way they think you should vote on June the 23rd. And first of all, I'll turn to Andrea Leadsom.
Well, I believe that the bright future that awaits us if we take back control on June the 23rd means that we will once again have a democracy, we will once again have an enormously greater control over our borders, over who comes to this country, whether they're a threat to us and whether they're not. We will be able to deal with all those issues. For me as a mother, for my children, for my grandchildren I hope to have someday, this is a vote for once in a generation. And it's quite clear to me that EU is yesterday's game. The UK's future is global, and with all my heart, as well as with all my head, I desperately urge you to take back control and vote Leave on June the 23rd.
Andrea Leadsom, thank you very much indeed. Amber Rudd.
Thank you. Well, tonight what we've heard is complete fantasy from the Vote Leave team. And actually, it reminds me of one of my favourite films when I was a child, which was The Wizard of Oz. A land of fantasy, of fun sounds and fun activities, but then when you pull back the curtain, there is nothing there. And we have had nothing of evidence here of what the Vote Leave campaign are proposing. And from Boris, well, he's the life and soul of the party, but he's not the man you want driving you home at the end of the evening. This is a very serious choice we have to make. There are 14 days to go. We have a strong place in the centre of Europe. It makes us stronger, safer and better off, which means more jobs at home, lower prices at home and more influence for our country. That's where we should be, leading, not leaving.
Amber Rudd, thank you. Lisa Stewart.
This is our last chance to take back control. If you would not vote to join now, then do not vote to stay. I'm a mother and I'm a grandmother, and I want my children and grandchildren to grow up in a strong and confident country. And we don't have to choose between trade and democracy. Countries across the world trade with Europe without giving away permanent control. A vote to stay is dangerous. It means handing over more and more power and money to unelected elites and bureaucrats every year. We will be trapped in a system where we are outvoted by the countries which have the euro as their currency. We will not be able to control our borders and have a say in who has the right to live and work here. I am an immigrant. I believe in Britain, and I wouldn't dream of talking down this country. That's why I'm saying to you, on June the 23rd, vote Leave and take control.
Lisa Stewart, thank you very much indeed. Nicholas Gordon.
The Leave campaign wants to focus on what we supposedly lose by being in the EU. I ask you to think more about what we have gained. The longest uninterrupted period of peace in modern history. The world's biggest single market of 500 million people to sell our goods and services into. Guaranteed protections for workers so that big multinationals and right-wing politicians can't force a race to the bottom. The freedom for all of us to travel freely in Europe. The ability, by working together, to tackle more effectively big challenges like climate change and security that no country can deal with alone. And none of that has meant giving up on independence. The UK, France, Germany, Denmark, Sweden, Ireland are all independent countries, but independent countries that choose to work together for the greater good. Let's keep hold of all of these gains. Vote Remain on the 23rd of June.
That's Gordon, thank you. Boris Johnson.
I think that what the last couple of hours, and indeed this whole campaign, have shown is there is a contrast between this side of the argument that is offering hope and that side of the argument that is offering nothing but fear about life outside. They say that we can't do it on our own. They say that we can't leave the EU. We say that we can. We say that we're a great country. They say that we have absolutely no choice. I listened to Amber Rudd's metaphor. We have no choice but to stay locked in the back of the EU car, driven in the wrong direction, going to a destination we do not want to go. We say we can take back control. Take back control of huge sums of money, take back control of our borders, take back control of our economic policy, our tax, our trade, and take back control of our democracy. Because that is fundamentally what this is all about. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for this country to speak up for democracy around the whole European Union. And I hope we do on June the 23rd.
Boris Johnson, thank you. And Angela Eagle. Thank you, Angela Eagle.
The Labour Party has always been the party of work and the party of jobs, and that is exactly what this referendum is about. But don't just take my word for it. Listen to Britain's trade unions and listen to the economic experts. They say leaving Europe will damage the economy, cost jobs and put workers' rights at risk. And let's face it, it won't be Boris Johnson who'll suffer the consequences of a smaller economy. It'll be those of you at home who've already suffered enough through Tory cuts. And those who want to use this vote to give the Tory party a bloody nose, I say this. I have fought the Tories all my life, but this is not a referendum on the government. It's about the future of our country. And the Labour Party believes passionately that our future lies in Europe. So for decent jobs, better opportunities and strong rights at work, vote Remain on June the 23rd.
Thank you all very much indeed. And a big thank you to our audience for their questions. Stay with us for reaction to tonight's debate on News at 10. In the meantime, thanks very much indeed for watching. Good night.